I'll never forget the way she looked at me that night. My best friend's mom, Claire, stood in her kitchen, her eyes catching the dim glow of the under-cabinet light. I'd known Claire for years. She was the mom who made us snacks, who laughed at our stupid jokes, who hugged me like I was family when I showed up at their door. But that night, something shifted. I wasn't just Jake's friend anymore. I was something else. And the worst part? I wanted to know what. I wanted to know why she said it, why she looked at me like that, why my chest ached every time I thought about it. I was terrified, guilty, and hooked all at once. How do you even process something like that? You're not supposed to feel this way about your best friend's mom. You're not supposed to wonder what she meant, or why her hand brushed mine when she handed me that glass, her fingers lingering just a second too long. But I did. And that's where it all started, where everything I thought I knew about myself, about Jake, about their family, started to unravel. Stick with me, because this story isn't what you think. It's messier, heavier, and way more complicated than I ever expected. It's a story about lines you don't cross, feelings you can't control, and the kind of guilt that follows you like a shadow. Let me take you back to the summer I turned 19. I was a lanky, awkward kid, still figuring out who I was, spending most of my days with Jake, my best friend since middle school. Jake was the kind of guy who made everything fun, loud, fearless, always dragging me into some dumb adventure, like sneaking into abandoned buildings or racing shopping carts in empty parking lots. His house was my second home, a refuge from the chaos of my own. My parents were always fighting, their voices echoing through our small apartment, and I'd do anything to get out. Jake's place was different. It was warm, lived in, with the smell of fresh coffee in the morning and the hum of the TV in the background. His mom, Claire, was always there, this steady presence who made their place feel alive. She was in her early 40s, with soft brown hair she tucked behind her ear when she was thinking, and a laugh that could light up a room. I never thought much about her beyond that. She was just Jake's mom. The one who'd scold us for leaving dishes in the sink, who'd sneak us extra cookies when we stayed up late playing video games, who'd ask about school with a smile that made you feel like she actually cared. I'd always liked her, sure, but in the way you like someone who's just part of your life, like a teacher or a neighbor. That summer, though, things felt different. I was working a dead-end job at a hardware store, hauling bags of mulch and ringing up customers who barely looked at me, all to save up for college. Jake was planning a big road trip before we both left for different schools, talking about driving across the country, blasting music, and living free for a few weeks. His house was my escape, a place where I could forget the tension at home. Claire seemed to sense that. She'd ask me how I was doing, really ask, not just the polite kind of way people do when they don't expect an answer. I'd shrug and say I was fine, but her eyes would linger, like she saw something I didn't. It made me uneasy, but not in a bad way. It was like she cared, maybe too much, and I didn't know what to do with that. Jake's dad wasn't around much. He had some corporate job that kept him on the road for weeks at a time, flying to meetings in cities I'd never heard of. Claire never talked about it, but you could feel the weight of it in the house. She'd get this faraway look sometimes, stirring a pot on the stove or staring out the window at nothing. I noticed it more that summer, maybe because I was there so often, practically living at their place. Jake didn't seem to care. He was too busy planning our next move, whether it was sneaking beers from his dad's stash or joyriding in his beat-up Honda. But I saw her. I saw the way she'd pause, like she was carrying something heavy no one else noticed, a sadness she tucked away when Jake was around. That night in the kitchen wasn't the first time I felt something off. A week earlier, I'd caught her watching me while I helped Jake fix his bike in the garage. I was covered in grease, laughing about some dumb joke he made, when I looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, a mug of tea in her hand. She didn't say anything, just smiled this quiet, almost sad smile that made my stomach twist. I brushed it off, told myself I was reading too much into it. Then there was the time she asked me to grab a box from the attic, some old photo albums she wanted to sort through. When I handed it to her, her fingers lingered on mine, Not long, just a second too long. My face got hot, and I laughed it off, muttering something about the dust up there. She laughed too, but her eyes didn't leave mine. I told myself I was imagining things. I mean, come on, she was my best friend's mom. I wasn't supposed to think about her like that, wasn't supposed to notice the way her hair fell over her shoulder or how her voice got softer when she talked to me. But that night, when she said those words, "You're not like other boys," it wasn't just my imagination anymore. It was real, and it scared the hell out of me. It was like a door had cracked open, just enough to let something dangerous slip through, and I didn't know if I wanted to slam it shut or step inside. The days after that kitchen moment were torture. I couldn't stop thinking about Claire. Every time I went to Jake's house, I was hyper-aware of her, where she was in the room, what she was doing, how she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I'd catch myself staring at her when she wasn't looking, noticing the way she moved, the way her hands smoothed her skirt when she sat down, the way her voice softened when she said my name. It wasn't just attraction, though that was part of it, this heat that made my face flush and my pulse race. It was something deeper, something I couldn't name, like she saw a part of me no one else did. Guilt gnawed at me every second. Jake was my brother in all but blood. We'd been through everything together, fights at school, late-night talks about girls, plans for the future. Betraying him, even in my thoughts, felt like a knife in my gut, twisting every time I saw him. I'd lie awake at night, replaying that moment in the kitchen, her words echoing in my head, her eyes locked on mine. I'd tell myself to stop, to get a grip, but then I'd see her again, and it would start all over. Claire didn't make it easier. She didn't flirt, not exactly, not in some obvious way that would have made it easier to call it out or shut it down. It was subtler, more dangerous. She'd asked me to stay for dinner, her voice casual but her eyes searching, like she was looking for something in me. She'd brushed past me in the hallway, her hand grazing my arm, so quick I could almost convince myself it was an accident. Once, when Jake was out grabbing pizza, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, asking about my plans for college, my dreams, my fears. No one had ever asked me those things, not like that, not with that kind of focus. Her attention felt like a spotlight, warm but dangerous, like standing too close to a fire. I stammered through my answers, my face burning, praying she couldn't hear my heart pounding. I told her about wanting to study engineering, about how I wasn't sure I was good enough, about how my parents' fights made me feel like I was always running from something. She listened, her head tilted slightly, her eyes soft but intense. When she reached out to touch my arm, just for a second, it felt like the air left the room. "You're going to be okay," she said, and the forbidden part hit me hardest when Jake was around. We'd be sprawled on the couch, playing video games, trash-talking each other, and Claire would walk in, offering us drinks or snacks. She'd smile at me, this small, private smile that made my stomach flip, and I'd freeze, terrified Jake would notice. He never did. He was too caught up in his own world, joking about the game or complaining about his girlfriend. But I felt like I was living a double life, one where I was his best friend, laughing and messing around like always, and another where I was, what? Obsessed with his mom? It sounds crazy when I say it out loud, but it didn't feel crazy. It felt real, raw, like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't walk away from. Every glance from her, every accidental touch, pulled me deeper into this thing I didn't understand but couldn't let go of. I started noticing things about her I hadn't before. How she'd hum to herself when she cooked, how her hands moved when she folded laundry, how her laugh sounded different when it was just us in the room. It was like I was seeing her for the first time, not as Jake's mom, but as Claire, a person with her own life, her own pain, her own desires. Then came the night that changed everything. Jake and I were supposed to head out for a bonfire with some friends, a big end-of-summer thing down by the lake. I was already on edge, dreading being around Claire, but knowing I'd see her before we left. Jake got a call from his girlfriend, some drama about a fight they'd had, and he bailed last minute, saying he'd meet me there later. I was about to grab my keys and go when Claire called me from the kitchen. Stay, she said, her voice soft but firm, like she wasn't asking. Keep me company. My stomach dropped. I should have said no. I should have made some excuse, grabbed my stuff, and left. But I didn't. I stayed, and we talked, really talked. She told me about her life before Jake, before her husband. She'd wanted to be an artist, had dreams of traveling the world, painting in cities like Paris and Florence. But life got in the way, marriage, a kid, a husband who was never around. Her voice cracked when she talked about giving up those dreams, and I felt this ache, like I wanted to fix it for her, like I could somehow make it right. I told her about my parents, how their fights made me feel like I was drowning, how I didn't know who I was supposed to be. She listened, really listened, her eyes never leaving mine, and when she reached across the table to touch my hand, I didn't pull away. Her fingers were warm, steady, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. That's when it hit me, this wasn't just a crush. It was something bigger, something that could destroy everything. If Jake found out, if anyone found out, it would ruin us, his family, our friendship, everything. But in that moment, with her hand on mine, I didn't care. I wanted to stay there forever, caught in that forbidden space where nothing else mattered. I wanted to tell her how I felt, how she made me feel seen in a way I never had before. But then I heard Jake's car pull into the driveway, the familiar rumble of his engine snapping me back to reality. I yanked my hand back, my heart racing, guilt flooding me like a tidal wave. Claire's face changed too, she looked scared, like she just realized what we were doing, what we'd almost let happen. We didn't say another word. I grabbed my stuff and left, my head spinning, my chest tight with panic and shame. I avoided her eyes as I passed Jake in the hallway, muttering something about forgetting something at home. The damage was done. I couldn't unfeel what I felt, couldn't undo the way she looked at me, the way her hand felt on mine. The next few weeks were a blur of avoidance and obsession. I tried to stay away from Jake's house, making excuses about work or family stuff, saying I was too busy to hang out. But Jake kept inviting me over, oblivious to the storm in my head. He'd text me, "Yo, come over, we're grilling tonight." Or, "Let's play some games, it's been forever." I'd go, because saying no felt like admitting something was wrong, like he'd figure it out if I kept dodging him. Every time I walked into their house, it was like she asked me to help with something small, like carrying groceries or moving a box, and her voice would be so casual, so normal, but her eyes would linger, and I'd feel it all over again, that mix of guilt and longing that kept me up at night. One night, Jake dragged me to a family barbecue at their house. I didn't want to go, told him I was tired, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. "Come on, man, it's just burgers and some neighbors, don't be lame," he said, and I couldn't think of a good enough excuse. Claire was there, of course, looking radiant in a simple sundress, her hair catching the golden light of the setting sun. I tried to focus on Jake, on the burgers sizzling on the grill, on the neighbors talking about football or the weather, but my eyes kept finding her. She was laughing with a group of women, her head thrown back, but every so often, she'd glance my way, her expression unreadable. It was torture, being so close but so far, knowing I couldn't act on what I felt, knowing I shouldn't even be thinking it. I kept my distance, sticking close to Jake, helping him flip burgers or grab beers from the cooler, but every time she moved through the yard, I felt her presence like a magnet. Then, during the barbecue, something shifted. Claire's husband was home for once, a tall, stern guy who barely acknowledged me when I said hi. I'd met him a few times before, but he was always distant, like he had better things to do than talk to his son's friend. I saw the way he talked to Claire, sharp, dismissive, cutting her off when she tried to tell a story about Jake's childhood. It made my blood boil, seeing her shrink under his words, her smile fading. I caught her eye across the yard, and for a second, I saw that same sadness I'd noticed before, the one she hid from everyone else. It was like she was trapped, playing a role she didn't want. I wanted to go to her, to say something, anything, to make her feel seen again, but I couldn't. Not with Jake standing next to me, not with her husband watching, not with all these people around. Later that night, after most of the guests had left, I was helping clean up, stacking plates and carrying empty bottles to the recycling. Claire asked me to grab some folding chairs from the garage, her voice light but with that same undertone that made my pulse quicken. It was just the two of us in the house, the hum of the fridge the only sound. She followed me into the garage, and before I knew it, she was standing close, too close. "I see you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I see how you look at me." My mouth went dry. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, to say she was wrong, but I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. She stepped closer, her breath warm against my cheek, her eyes searching mine. "This can't happen," she said, but her voice wavered, and her eyes said something else, something that made my heart pound so hard I thought it might burst. I don't know who moved first, but suddenly her lips were on mine, soft and urgent, and for one reckless moment, I let myself fall into it. It was like the world stopped, like nothing else mattered but the feel of her, the taste of her, the way her hands gripped my shirt like she was holding on for dear life. It lasted maybe 5 seconds before she pulled back, her face pale, her eyes wide with panic. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "This was a mistake." She turned and walked away, her steps quick, like she couldn't get out of there fast enough. I stood there, my heart pounding, my world spinning, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Guilt, shame, desire, it all crashed together, leaving me dizzy and sick. I knew she was right. This was wrong, impossible, dangerous. It could ruin everything, Jake's trust, her marriage, my own sense of who I was. But I couldn't stop wanting it. I couldn't stop wanting her, couldn't stop replaying that kiss, the way it felt, the way it made everything else fade away. The days that followed were worse. Claire avoided me, barely looking at me when I was at their house. I avoided Jake as much as I could, making excuses to skip our usual hangouts, saying I had to work late or help my parents. But I was drowning in guilt, terrified he'd find out, terrified I'd ruined everything. I couldn't stop replaying that kiss, couldn't stop wondering what might have happened if we hadn't stopped, if Jake's car hadn't pulled into the driveway that night in the kitchen, if I'd said something instead of running. I started noticing things I hadn't before. How Claire's husband barely looked at her when he was home, how she seemed to shrink when he was around, her shoulders hunching like she was trying to make herself smaller. It made me angry, protective, like I had a right to feel that way. I didn't. I knew I didn't. But knowing and feeling are two different things, and my feelings were a mess, pulling me in every direction at once. I started losing sleep, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. I'd think about Claire's laugh, her sadness, the way she'd looked at me in the kitchen, in the garage. I'd think about Jake, about how he'd been there for me through every stupid fight with my parents, every failed crush, every time I felt like I wasn't enough. I'd think about how I was betraying him, how I was betraying myself. I tried to talk myself out of it, to focus on college, on the road trip Jake kept talking about, on anything but her. But every time I closed my eyes, she was there, and I was back in that garage, her lips on mine, her voice saying, "I see you." I started wondering if I was losing it, if I was making it all bigger in my head than it was. But then I'd see her, and it would hit me all over again, that ache, that pull, that thing I couldn't name. Then came the twist I never saw coming. One night, Jake showed up at my place, his face pale, his hands shaking like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't say anything at first, just stood in my doorway, clutching a piece of paper. "You need to see this," he said finally, his voice rough. He handed me a letter, creased and worn, like he'd read it 100 times. It was from Claire, addressed to me, written in her neat, careful handwriting. It wasn't a love letter, not exactly. It was a confession. She wrote about how lost she felt, how her marriage had been crumbling for years, how my kindness, my attention, reminded her of who she used to be, before she gave up her dreams, before she became just Jake's mom, just her husband's wife. She wrote that she didn't want a relationship, not like that, she wasn't that reckless, wasn't that naive. She just wanted to feel seen, to feel alive again, even just for a moment. She wrote that she was sorry, that she'd crossed a line, that she knew it was wrong. She said she was leaving, not just because of me, but because she needed to figure herself out, to find the person she'd lost somewhere along the way. By the time Jake found the letter, she was gone. She'd left a note for her husband, saying she needed space, maybe for good, and she'd packed a bag and left that morning. Jake was furious, not at me, thank God, but at her, at the situation, at the way his family was falling apart. He didn't know about the kiss, didn't know how deep it went, but he knew something had happened. He looked at me like I'd betrayed him anyway, like I should have known better, should have seen the signs, should have stopped it before it got this far. And he was right. I should have. I should have walked away that night in the kitchen, should have said no when she asked me to stay, should have pushed her away in the garage. But I didn't, and now I carried that guilt like a weight, knowing I'd played a part in breaking something I couldn't fix. Jake didn't say much after that. He just left, the letter still in his hand, and I stood there, feeling like the ground had dropped out from under me. I never saw Claire again. Jake and I drifted apart, not because of a fight, but because some things can't be unsaid, some moments can't be undone. We'd text sometimes, meet up for a beer, but it wasn't the same. There was a wall between us now, built from secrets and guilt and things we never talk about. I still think about her, about that night in the kitchen, about the letter, about the way her eyes looked in the garage, full of fear and want and something else I couldn't name. I wonder where she is, if she's found the peace she was looking for, if she's painting again, if she's free. I wonder if I'll ever stop feeling this ache, this mix of guilt and longing that hits me when I least expect it, like when I pass a house that looks like hers or hear a song that reminds me of that summer. What would you do if you were me? Would you chase a feeling you know is wrong, knowing it could destroy everything, or would you let it go and live with the what-ifs, the questions that never get answered? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know what you think. If this story hit you, if it made you feel that ache, that pull, smash that like button and subscribe for more raw, real stories that'll keep you up at night, wondering about the lines we cross and the ones we don't. Until next time, stay curious, and maybe think twice before you linger in a moment that feels too good to be true. 2.